wanted to do a quick disclaimer. It features the kidnapping of a child, and so if you cannot watch true crime cases with children, please click away. And I mean no disrespect to the victims by telling this story in an ASMR style. So let's talk about our case today. Our case takes place near Hopewell, New Jersey on March 1st, 1932. It takes place in the home of the Lindbergh family, where Charles Lindbergh lived. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he was very influential at this time. He is a famous aviator, and he flew the first solo transatlantic flight from New York to Paris. He was actually Time's Person of the Year, and this family had a large estate and wealth. He lived there with his wife, Anna, and his son, who was 20 months old, and his name is Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. Now, on March 1st, the nanny named Betty Gow went upstairs at about 9 p.m. to check on Charles Jr. in the nursery. However, to her absolute horror, the baby was nowhere to be found. She ran to get the parents, and they called the police. They found several things. One, they found a ransom note demanding about $50,000. They found muddy footprints that were too indistinct to trace, and a little ways off, they found 2 sections of a broken ladder that was used to reach the nursery windowsill, because the nursery was on the 2nd floor. There were no blood stains around the crime scene whatsoever, and at this time, there was no DNA technology or advancement, so it limited the investigation severely. Now, immediately the household staff and parents were investigated and interviewed, but no leads turned up from that. Charles Lindbergh began making widespread appeals in the newspapers in order to catch the kidnappers' attention. A second ransom note was received by Charles Lindbergh on March 6th, in which the ransom amount increased to $70,000, which at this time is a large amount of money. And I can see to my left a picture of that ransom note, and it is York City teacher placed an ad in the newspaper. In that ad, he offered to be the person to contact the kidnappers. And the following day, Condon received a ransom note directly to his house, which showed that the kidnappers had accepted him as the go-between. I am not exactly sure why they needed a go-between. Perhaps the Lindbergh family power and police connections scared them to the point that they needed someone else. But I don't know. On March 10th, Condon received $70,000 from Charles Lindbergh, and he began trying to communicate with the kidnappers through the newspaper. He went by the code name Chafsy, and he began telling the kidnappers through code that they were ready to pay the money. At about 8:30 on March 12th, a random taxi driver showed up at Condon's house with a fifth ransom note. The taxi driver had no idea what he was delivering, and he was sent from an unidentified man. The message that the taxi driver had was that there was a note waiting for Mr. Condon. The note was to be found beneath a stone at a vacant stand 100 feet from the subway station. And Condon went there and started to follow instructions on the note. The instructions told him to go to the cemetery, Woodlawn Cemetery. So Condon met a man who called himself John, which was a fake name, and they began to discuss payment and what to do. Condon asked John for proof of the baby's identity and safety. A seventh ransom note and a baby's sleeping pajama set was received by Condon on March 16th. The sleeping set was confirmed by the Lindbergh parents, and the proof of identity was met. Now, several notes would be traded back and forth between Condon and this mysterious John. At one point, John had increased the ransom money to $100,000. After following the instructions on the 12th note, Condon met the man John and was able to reduce the amount to $50,000 once more. Now, this amount was exchanged for a location. John told Condon that the baby could be found on a boat called the Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Immediately, Lindbergh and the police went to the harbor to look for the Nellie, but after an exhaustive search, the boat was declared to be a fake and a false lead. But Lindbergh was still determined to find his son, despite losing the ransom money. But sadly, on May 12, 1932, the body of a baby was found less than 5 miles from the Lindbergh home. The baby's body was badly decomposed, but an autopsy showed that it was indeed Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr., state police, but they could not intervene. However, because of public outrage, President Herbert Hoover on May 13th declared that the FBI should be the lead investigation on this case, and they took over from local state police. The public outrage of this case and the kidnapping led U.S. Congress to pass the Federal Kidnapping Act, also known as Lindbergh Law, on June 22nd, 1932. The Lindbergh Law made kidnapping cases across state lines a federal crime and an act that can be punished by death. But it should be noted that all hope was certainly not lost to find the killer, because the Lindberghs paid John with gold certificates issued by the U.S. Treasury that were very common during this time. And on those gold certificates that could be exchanged for money, the U.S. Treasury has an identity number on them. And so the police told the banks in the region the number that was on the gold certificates. And so if anyone came in to exchange them, the banks would tell the police immediately. So now police and the FBI just had to wait for their killer to cash in. Now, during this time, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order on April 5th, 1933, stating that all circulating gold certificates must be exchanged for Federal Reserve notes by May 1st, 1933. This was done to prevent the hoarding of gold during the Great Depression, but it also helped the investigation. Unfortunately, more than a year would pass before the case had its major breakthrough. But a service station brought forward. At first, the evidence was primarily circumstantial. Things like Hauptmann's tools kind of matched the tools that were used to open the nursery. The ladder steps contained the same material as the material in Hauptmann's attic, and things like that. Additionally, Condon's telephone number was written on Hauptmann's closet door. Lindbergh went on the stand saying he recognized Hauptmann's voice from the telephone calls. And also, Condon was brought forward, and he said that Hauptmann matched the face of John. Now, Hauptmann took to the witness stand, saying that he was beaten by police in custody. The police forced him to match the handwriting on the ransom notes, and he said he was completely innocent. After more than 5 weeks, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on February 13th, 1935, and Hauptmann was sentenced to death. Hauptmann tried to appeal the decision, and his appeals eventually reached the Supreme Court. However, it was unsuccessful. He was finally executed by electric chair on April 3rd, 1936. My heart, of course, goes out to the parents of the Lindbergh child. I could not imagine losing my baby like that. And I think the evidence against Hauptmann were pretty damning for him. But let me know what you think. This case really reads like a mystery novel or like a true crime sensational piece. And I can't believe that it's real. I also want to give a special shout out to Alicia for bringing this case to me. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed and that the mic brushing was relaxing. And I hope you have peaceful